Last minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. Is okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always
Thanks,
as simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm so glad you joined us here today. So, we are going to talk about all things fitness, wellness, mental, and emotional health. So, I'm glad you joined us on the NASM Podcast Network. And today we're talking about the magic of storytelling, how to use your story to spark change. I have to say, there's nothing I love more than telling a story. And I think the only thing I love more than that is hearing a good story. Stories stick, right? They're like songs. They stay in your memory data bank, if you will. And it's always the stories that we remember more than the science. So I have a guest today. Her name is Stephanie Paul. And she is going to talk to you about how to captivate, influence, and create deep connections through storytelling. Stephanie is an actress and an executive coach, and she's a comedian, and she has written a book about storytelling. So I think she's the perfect person. She's also got a performance background. So she's literally going to talk about how do we rewire the brain through storytelling. So Stephanie, I'm going to have you come in and say hello.
Hi.
How are
Shameless
you?
plug for my book.
All right. Well, there you go. All right. Well, it's nice to meet you, Stephanie. And I'm so glad that I have you here to talk about storytelling and share that whole concept because I do think that stories create deep, deep, deep connections. And when we share our story with others, we feel like we know them and they feel like they know us. And to me, there's vulnerability in storytelling. So what sparked your fascination with storytelling? And how has it transformed how you communicate?
When I left the entertainment world, it was an interesting transition to go from, being a professional actress and stand-up comedian, producer, writer, director, things like that, and then become an executive leadership coach and a certified life coach. It sort of stemmed from a colleague of mine saying, you should teach the acting thing in the corporate world. And I'm like, don't be ridiculous. And an article was written about me in the newspaper. And the next thing I know, I had 2 clients reaching out to me saying, hey, can you help me with this from the corporate world? And then I ended up going into the TED Talk world for about 4 years, and I've coached over 70 people in that TED format. And I was executive producer for the TEDx Mission Viejo back in 2016. And that sort of springboarded me into helping biotech companies raise startup money, series, B, C, D type thing. And I realized all of a sudden that I was working with people who had PhDs in science. And I'm like, I don't think I can just sort of like prattle on with some acting and some stand-up and some comedy and some storytelling stuff. I really need to understand the science behind it now that I'm working with real scientists. So that's kind of where I started the deep dive into the science, the biology, the neuroscience, and why storytelling actually works on our biology and our brains.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. And I can see where you would say, okay, I need to tell stories, but I need to support that by science because these are people who are grounded in science. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So, can you share a moment when literally, like that whole magic of storytelling literally changed someone's behavior or their response in real time?
Mm-hmm. I can actually. I was thinking about this, has happened many times, but I was trying to think of something that was sort of recent and poignant. And my partner has 2 children from his previous marriage, and they are 13 and 16 right now. And one of them, the youngest, he was having an issue going through something that's very normal when you have children and as you're growing up, where is he thought that we loved his sister more, his elder sister more than we loved him, and we were giving her better, more positive attention. And he was having this issue with that, and he was not, his behavior had not been gracious because he was being very jealous in the way he was responding to things. And I told him a story, and I said, you're not that different from me. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, I'm the youngest of 4. And my siblings are 5, 9, and 10 years older than me. And you just have one. You just have your older sister. But I had an older sister and 2 older brothers. So I had 3 people on me as the youngest. And I, shared that story with him about how I felt. And so I understood. And so that story truly connected him with me. He stopped crying in that moment. He started asking me more questions about what I did when I was his age and how I dealt with those things. And stories truly help us connect, and they help us understand that people understand us, because people don't care unless they know you care first. And I think that's a Roosevelt quote initially, but it's really, really true. People need to feel felt. They need to feel understood and heard. And what stories can do, maybe the scenario is not exactly the same thing, but people can place themselves in the story. They can see and feel and emote, because that story is akin to something that they've experienced or something they're experiencing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's a great quote. And I do agree. I think that anytime somebody tells me a story when I'm going through something, I feel like they see me, they feel me, they hear me, they experience me, and they go, okay, I have something that will align. And, I do have to say, though, that sometimes, like in the work that I do in mental health, I will share a story, but I'm cautious because I don't want it to be gratuitous. I don't want it to transform into being about me, if you will. But I think that there's that little bit of like kind of nuance or caution. But I love the story you just shared, because that's perfect. When we share, especially with anyone who's struggling, that we share that struggle, they go, okay, I'm not alone. And that right there is like, oh, I just lost 5 pounds of heaviness because I am not alone. Other people have been here, done that, and now they're okay. So I think that's good. And that kind of brings me, Stephanie, to my next thought, which is, you always hear that facts tell, but stories sell. And honestly, you hear that more and more in this speaking world. People want to hear stories. Tell your stories. Stories sell. And I'm like, yes, but what's really happening in our brain? Maybe the low version of what's happening in our brain, like not too sciencey, but kind of what's happening in our brain when we hear a compelling story versus just somebody shooting data at us, if you will.
Well, people connect to messes more than they connect to successes, right? So you can throw all the accolades in a list as long as your arm, but when you actually share a mistake, a problem, an issue, an adversity with somebody else, they're more likely to connect to you, like, oh yeah, I've been there, or I've got something similar. And what's happening in our brains when that happens is you're lighting up emotions. And here's the thing about decision making. We make decisions based on what we remember, not on what we forget. We remember things when they're more salacious, when they're more emotional, when they're more engaging with our emotions and our feelings. So a list of facts and a list of data is not emotional. We don't connect to that. We don't remember that. So we don't use that information when we make a decision. When we make a decision, we cannot not even make the simplest of choice without a limbic system buy-in. And it was a very famous neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, who discovered this. He's listed in a lot of books, this particular piece of research. He was doing a study with patients who had damage to the brain where emotions were created, and he stumbled across this finding during his research, that they could talk logically and reasonably about making decisions, but they couldn't make the simplest of choice because they couldn't get that emotional buy-in from the brain. So this is why stories are so key, because our brain goes, okay, facts, figures, how do I feel about that? The story engages the feelings and the memory, so that when it comes time to making a decision, we always remember how people made us feel. We do not remember the specific details.
Gosh, I feel like I just kind of need to pause because there was so much in there. And you're so right. It's so, I don't remember teachers who were like, when I think about a good teacher, I think about a teacher who I could connect with, who I felt connected to, a teacher who didn't talk at me, but talked, just like engaged in my thoughts and my opinions and my voice and me being present in the room. And I love what you said about messes versus successes, because I feel like that gets a bad rap in the sense that people are like, oh, I love the way people come and surround me when I'm in a bad situation, but when I'm succeeding, they don't want to, throw me a good for you. And I don't think that's what you're saying, though. I think that
Mm-mm.
you're just really saying that there is that to a degree, but really what we want is, I want to know that somebody was a hot mess at some point and that they were able to rise up from it, because I know
Mhm.
that I've had many points where I am a hot mess. And I want to know that I too will overcome and I will rise up from it. And
Mhm.
I also like how you said that facts and figures don't involve feelings. And at the end of the day, a story is at the heart of the matter. And so for me, that's how I connect. I don't care about facts and figures. And if
Mhm.
you've met anybody who is so analytical, I think it's more difficult to relate to them, because they don't seem to have that ability to really connect through, hey, but I'm not feeling you. Okay. I
Mhm.
hear your
Mhm.
facts,
Mhm.
but tell me something I can relate to.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that was really good. But so I have to ask you, some people are like, well, my story is just not that interesting. Like I haven't had anything really big happen in my life. Like, what kind of story would I share? So what do you think is that, what's the biggest misconception about what makes a story powerful?
Well, I'm going to just start off with experience of working with biotech companies and helping them pitch and raise money. You know those pitch decks, because it's biotech, they've got a lot of facts and figures and a lot of data. And the most successful fundraisers that I've worked with who raised money really quickly were the ones who really got the storytelling component and got into the emotions and got into, engaging with their audience, because investors don't give you money because of the facts and figures in your pitch deck. They give you money because they feel connected and engaged with you. They feel like there's somebody that you want to go out and have dinner with and hang out with and grab a beer with and get to know. That's biologically what happens. People forget that the facts and figures are important, the key components are important, but if we look at, so the research shows us, and there's no specific actual number, but 63 to 93% of how we communicate is nonverbal. So nonverbal communication has nothing to do with facts and figures. That's 7%, right? If we go with the 93%, that's nonverbal. So we have over 4,000 human behaviors. Some of them are micro expressions. Our limbic system reads them really well. Our limbic system does not understand logic and reason. Our limbic system is the one that feels. So you've got to get really good at using your voice. You got to get really good at eliciting emotions by your actions. Your actions have to be congruent with your words. So you can't sit there and go, hi, I feel really excited today. I'm so excited to be here. This is amazing, Angie. You just made me feel so cool. No, that is BS. That is not congruency. And people act weird when they get in front of other people or in front of a camera. They suddenly don't, their personality disappears. And all of a sudden, we've got this person talking like a robot. You can't be perfect. People don't want you to be perfect. People want you to be emotional and excited and passionate, and they want to hear it in your voice. They want to see it in your actions. You know, just a slight differentiation of showing you something. I'm going to take a simple sentence, and I want you to clock what your brain does with the different ways that I say it. You could close your eyes and listen to me saying this.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I love chocolate bananas. I love dipping chocolate bananas into chocolate with more chocolate and chocolate sprinkles. It's delicious. Now I'm going to say it a different way. Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I love love chocolate bananas. I love dipping bananas into chocolate. I love the sprinkles that go on top. Oh my God, that's so delicious. What happened with your brain?
So I went from feeling sleepy and bored to feeling your passion and feeling hungry for exactly what you were referring to, because you got me, you captivated me. You weren't monotone and you used inflection, and I really felt it. But I
I
also saw it
elicited
in your body
I
language.
elicited a result
Yes.
from your biology. That is what storytelling does. True, good storytelling will elicit a result from your biology, and it'll engage the brain, and it'll make the decision. If I was to talk like that, like the chocolate banana story all the time, you'd be like, oh my God, she's amazing. And I always feel hungry when I'm around her. That would be the feeling that you would remember.
Yeah. Well, then I wouldn't be able to hang around you anymore, because I'm like, Stephanie, I can't just be walking around being hungry all the time. Okay. You can't just talk about food nonstop. But I love that analogy, because I do think that, I'm in a speaker group, and that's exactly what we talk about, is telling stories. And we talk about, timing and what kind of story we're going to tell, and how we're going to engage the audience, and how once we've got them and we've told our story and they're listening, now we can get into some of the other stuff, the science or what have you. But people want to hear a story. They want to connect with you. They want to know your story, and they want to know more than just what you know. They want to feel like you want to know about them, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
we all know what we know, but how much do we know about the people sitting in their seats? And I think they want that. They want to know that I care about them, that I'm not just going to talk at them for an hour.
Mhm.
So I like that. So you, Stephanie, you work with all these different professionals. You've worked with actors and comedians, and now you work with executive coaches. What do you think has been like a surprise, or it doesn't have to be your biggest surprise, but what's a surprising secret that you've discovered about storytelling that people don't really realize?
I think I kind of a little bit I mentioned it before, but that the fact that story and laughter are innately built into our brain. Um, I had a comedian, J. Chris Newberg, a friend of mine, who's probably most famous for roasting somebody on America's Got Talent, and him and I went to an open mic together one night, and he said to me before I went up on stage, he goes, "Just go up on stage and say nothing for like 2 minutes." And I'm like, "I'm not doing that." That was terrifying to me. I wasn't. It was a sort of beginning of my career as a comedian, and I watched him. He went up after me, and I watched him go up on stage, and he didn't say anything for about 2 minutes, and he just stared at the audience. He had them rolling in their seats. He'd done nothing. He'd done absolutely nothing except for, with an amusing look on his face, stare at the audience. And they biologically got themselves into laughter. It was contagious. The first person started laughing, then everybody started laughing, and he had said nothing and done nothing. And I was speaking at a CEO conference. There was probably about 300 CEOs in the audience, and somebody raised their hand and asked me at the end of my presentation, because I was talking about the power of scripting and story, and he said, "How do you engage in an audience without saying anything?" And I did exactly that. I took my friend's tool from the comedy show, and I just started looking at people in the eye and smiling at them. And within about 30 seconds, I had a room of 300 people laughing and giggling. And I looked back at him and I said, "Does that answer your question?" And he's like, "Oh my God, yes." And same question has come from another audience, where a young guy raised his hand, and it was a sales group. And he said to me, "Can you tell a story without speaking?" And I said, "Have you ever heard of Marcel Marceau or a mime? Of course you can tell a story without speaking, because if the emotions and the biology are there, we don't need the words. We read each other very, very well." So I think that's one of the secrets, and some of the things that are misunderstood, and I'm going to say it again because I really want it to be clear, is we must be congruent. We must be congruent with our behavior and the things that we're saying. We must feel it in order for others to believe it. And part of storytelling, a huge part of it that's really important is listening. And it's not just listening with your ears to what people are saying, it's listening to their biology, it's listening to their non-verbals. People will always tell you what they're thinking. You don't have to read their mind. The better you get at reading non-verbals and human behavior, the better you'll become as a storyteller, because you'll always give your audience what they want to hear.
That is so powerful. That is so true, because I think that if you don't have a good read, and it goes back to the whole emotional intelligence piece, you kind of have to be able to read a room in order to, you have to be aware of what people, how they're responding to your words. But I totally love that story about just staring at everybody in the room. I have a keynote coming up, and my mind is like, I wonder what would happen, because it's a group of very intellectual, very analytical people. And I'm like, I wonder what would happen if I just stood there and stared at them with kind of a funny look on my face. Either they would fire me and never hire me again, or not. I don't know. But I want to reset for a minute here. So my name is Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm talking to Stephanie Paul. She is a magical storyteller, and she's also an executive coach. And we're talking about the magic of storytelling, how you can use your story to spark change. And no, you don't have to have this big, powerful story. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get to that next in my next question with Stephanie, because I think that sometimes it's the big, powerful stories that we really have to have the right audience. Sometimes it's the smaller, sillier stories that can really connect us. And that's kind of what I want to ask you, Stephanie, is how do I identify? So as a matter of fact, in my speaking group, I told a story. And I'm not going to tell this audience the story. And the reason why is it's a heavy story. It's a hard, hard story. It's a true story of something that happened to me. And it was life-changing. It was a personal narrative disruption. It was upsetting. It's still difficult for me to process. And I decided that it was a safe space for me to lift that story, get it out of here, and share it. And it's kind of heartbreaking, but it also was a story of resilience. Now, I have a keynote coming up. I'm not sharing that story. It's too heavy. It's too much. It's not going to land on the topic. I'm like, nope, got lots of other stories. So how do we know? How do we know what stories are going to identify?
Well, it's interesting you are talking about your story, because you reminded me of a situation when I went through my divorce, and I was still doing stand-up. And every time I tried to do material about my divorce, it never landed on the audience. And one of my colleagues, another stand-up comedian, came up to me and he goes, "You can't use your stand-up material yet." And I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "You're still too close to the content. You're too close to the story, and it's too painful, and the audience know." And I was like, "Oh God, you're so right." Going back to that congruency, right? So any type of, you won't be able to tell that story in a normal, like, public setting until you have released that connection to that pain. Once you release the connection to the pain and you can be more humorous about it and lighthearted about it, you'll be able to tell anybody that story. Because right now, maybe shame is still attached to it, or fear or pain and those type of things, which makes it harder for us to discuss, you know. So I had a story about a client. She had a nonprofit organization, and she had a big fundraiser coming up, and she wanted me to help her prepare her presentation, for the fundraiser. And she really, really struggled with me because she wanted to talk about the fact that she'd had a stroke. And I kept saying to her, the audience are not going to connect with that. Your audience is not going to be filled with a ton of people that have had a stroke. I know this. But she worked with children. Her organization worked with children. I said, but you need to talk about your childhood. The audience will connect with what happened in your childhood. And she just wouldn't do it. She wouldn't connect. And I said, we can do it in a lighthearted way, but your childhood is the reason why you run this organization today. It's got nothing to do with your stroke. And she refused. And it was a real shame, because I felt like if she had really told that story about her childhood and didn't have to get into the negative details, but the audience would have connected with her better. So finding the details about the stuff that you're willing to talk about, but also understand that you have to know the audience, right? And the one thing that she had with that audience is every single person in that audience at some stage had been a child. So she would have been able to use components of her story to connect and engage with the emotions of that audience. And like my biotech companies who connected and engaged with their audience would have raised a lot more money because people connected to it. Now, I'm not saying I want to get money out of people's pockets, but it does make a difference. People, when they feel something, and they connect and they engage. And that's why, once again, stories are so important, because you elicit those feelings. And it doesn't always have to be a positive thing. Stories, can have negative sides to them. Horror stories, can take us through fear and anxiety and all those types of things. Excuse me. You have to know what the result is that you're wanting to elicit from your story. So what are the emotions and what is the result that you're looking for? And that's the key component to what part of the story or how you shape your story.
That was really good. And I've been processing that. And I think that, you mentioned earlier, release the connection to the pain before you can really tell a painful story. And that was really good, because I do think you can take people into pain, but you have to have that purpose for why you're taking them there. And can you pull them back out? Because we've all been in a room where someone tells a story, and then we are so emotionally connected to that story that we're almost uncomfortable, because we sense that the person telling the story is not far enough away from it. And we're like, oosh, how are they going to get out of this so that they can keep us, but where we're not comforting them? You're right. I mean, it's like kind of that weird nuance of, I don't want to comfort the speaker. Okay. I want to feel the speaker, but I don't want to feel like I have to hand the speaker a box of tissues, because then it becomes kind of uncomfortable. Am I catching that nuance correctly?
Yeah, you are. And it can happen in multiple different ways. I've had it with one client who she took an energy on stage with her because she'd had an argument with a guy backstage before she walked on stage. And I was analyzing her presentation. One of the things that I do for clients, they can send me a video of their presentation and I'll analyze it down into minute detail, and I'll tell them stuff, especially with the human behavior and the congruency and things like that. And I said to her before I gave her her feedback, what happened before you walked on stage? And she was like, huh? She didn't get it. I saw straight away that something happened before she went, because I knew her baseline. I knew the type of person that she was. I'd worked with her and her team. And she said, oh, I got into this argument with this beep, 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 like the guy backstage and blah, blah, blah. And I said, do you realize that you took that negative energy on stage with you and you came across like a giant, witch with a capital B? And she was like, oh my God, I had no. And I said, that's not your personality, but you had that residual energy of that argument and you carried it through your entire presentation. And I was in a situation where it was the International Coaches Federation, and they asked me to open their conference one day because they wanted it high energy and all that good stuff. So I opened it, but I also talked to them about presenting and storytelling and things like that. And funny enough, at the end of the day, the keynote presenter came along, and he hadn't been there all day. He literally showed up like 10 minutes before his presentation, which I always say to people, don't do that. Get to know your audience. If you can be there all day and you're speaking at an event, you should try and be there and get to meet people. It's super key. And he started doing all the things that I had coached and told in my presentation people not to do with the audience. And it was fascinating because collectively the audience were going, oh, they were making these noises every time he did something and I'd said, don't do this. No. And I thought it was hysterical because I was like, wow, first of all, they actually remembered what I taught them, which was interesting. And because I was reading this guy's behavior, I actually had the guy who had spoken earlier in the day sitting in front of me, and he had done the mindfulness and meditation presentation. And I kept tapping him on the shoulder and I said, the speaker's going to talk about this next. And he goes, how do you know? And I said, just watch. And the speaker did actually, his next topic was about what I had just mentioned. And he was like, you're creepy. How do you know this? And I said, I'm reading his behavior and I can see the childhood anger that he still holds on being picked on at school. Like, it was bizarre. Like, I was just in the zone of reading his behavior because I've spent 30 years doing a technique which it teaches you how to read behavior. But it was really interesting. So those congruency things are really, really key with storytelling, and human behavior is a really, really big component of it.
Yeah.
Nonverbals.
So, Stephanie, really what I hear you say is that poor man. He had no idea. But that's what he gets for showing up at the last minute. But that's so true. You do. Anytime I do any kind of speaking, I'm always in the audience well ahead of time because I want to know how other people, what topics they're selecting, how the audience is responding. And then I kind of know, okay, I think I need to bring this into the room. So, Stephanie, we're going to close the show. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people how to reach you before we go.
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name's Stephanie Paul. They can email me through my website, stephaniepaulinc.com. They can buy my book on Amazon, Unlock the Magic of Story. And I do have an online training coming up in the spring. So if anybody wants to learn more about that online training, and there'll be 6 modules, all based around, one of them is based around my book, but all about voice and storytelling and humor and all those good things that go into presenting, speaking, and storytelling and leadership, believe it or not.
I bet that'll be fascinating. Well, Stephanie, I really appreciate you coming on. And I really appreciate all of you with listening on Strong Mind, Strong Body for joining us for this episode and for all of our episodes. I hope that you go out and share your story with somebody. We'll see you next week.